Hello and welcome to today's segment of the timeline. Today I'm going to be covering three sections, not all. We're going to cover cell phones, computers, and then I'm going to go into the internet as well. Both cell phones and computers became common in the average American household between 1990 and 2000, not when they were invented. Remember, when we talk about inventions, we're talking about when your average American had access to them, not necessarily when they were invented, because when they were invented, chances are good they weren't changing many people's lives. Okay, so cell phone. Cell phones had been around for about 20 years before this decade, but they weren't very common and were only really used for emergencies. Cell phones in the 70s and 80s were often called car phones or bag phones because they were so large and heavy, due to the batteries, that you literally had to carry them around in a bag or leave them in your car for an emergency. The first cell phones didn't do anything except make phone calls, and they didn't even do that very well. There was such a thing as roaming fees, and if you traveled outside your home area, then you got charged a roaming fee, which meant that any phone call was a lot more expensive. So if you were at home, why would you use your cell phone? And if you weren't at home, then you couldn't afford to use your cell phone. But anyway, there were no map functions on early cell phones. They did not have cameras. They did not connect to email. There was no internet connectivity. If you made a call from outside of your area, you'd be charged quite expensive roaming fees. Sorry, I already said that. As battery technology improved, the phones got smaller and lighter and more portable. Eventually, this trend even reversed itself, since people with larger fingers, especially men, were struggling to use the smaller and smaller phones. Smartphones, which we would qualify as being like a computer phone hybrid, weren't common until after the year 2010. Okay, then we'll move on to computers. Computers had also been around for a few decades before they became common in the average American household. Like phones, one of the limiting factors had been the size of the battery. The first computers took up entire buildings and did less, computer power-wise, than cheap smartphones would do today. The computers average Americans had during this decade were basically glorified word processors and spreadsheets. They did not connect to anything except the electrical outlet and possibly a printer. You could not share or collaborate on computer-based projects. Laptop computers were not common yet. We're talking about what would have been called a desktop computer that was plugged into the wall. Okay, then, by the year 2000, the internet becomes more common in your average American household. A lot of businesses were using internet before this time period, but for your average American, it's really not until 2000 or even a few years later that some parts of the country got pretty solid internet connection. And then, the internet became more common in average American households and started to make computers, and eventually phones, much more interesting. The internet was most often accessed by phone lines originally. A family would have to unplug the landline phone cord from the wall and plug it into the computer, rendering the phone unusable. Sending and receiving even one photo this way sometimes took an hour or more. Email quickly gained popularity, but was still not a mainstream form of communication. There were not really any or many social media platforms or online shopping outlets. Broadband internet service did not become widely popular or available until closer to 2010. Common in the average American household, Facebook and YouTube around 2006, Twitter 2009, Amazon not really until 2015. Thanks!